Thanks for joining. You know, every successful startup has a founding story which they reinvent as they get more successful. But here you're among friends, so it'd be really interesting to hear the real story of how you came up with the idea and what you did and where it came from. And it sounds like before Vannevar, you had an interesting career, first starting at McKinsey. And was McKinsey right out of college?
Yeah, right out of college.
Where'd you go to school?
University of Georgia.
Oh, some other school.
Some other school.
Okay. And what made you join McKinsey?
I actually wanted to do a math PhD, but my math advisor at the time told me, hey, you are not good enough to get into MIT or Stanford as a PhD student. And so I was looking around at job options, and some of the smartest people that I knew from undergrad were going to McKinsey, and so I thought, hey, I'll throw my name in the hat. And that's honestly how I ended up in the door. It was not very well thought out, other than,
Yeah, McKinsey's a great place.
Yeah.
So, how'd you end up in national security? Did you pick it, or work your way into it? Or?
Yeah, as soon as I got into McKinsey, the first projects that I was working on were consumer goods related, like for example, like baby lotion pricing in Brazil, which to me was extremely uninteresting.
But you're now probably the best domain expert in the world
on
baby lotion. Anybody have any baby lotion in Brazil questions?
Yeah, I can tell you how they price it. Yeah. But I think...
Portuguese.
Yes, yeah. And pretty quickly, I knew that was not what I wanted to do. I have a family background with both my grandparents in the military, in national security, and in particular, some of the stuff that was going on in Asia has been kind of like of interest to me. And so I joined a research group actually when I was in undergrad that was focused on that. And right when I got to McKinsey, I just tried to weasel my way into the DC office and started to get staff on some of the projects that I was hearing about in the defense and intelligence space.
And did you end up there in the DC office?
Yes, yeah, luckily.
Physically, did you move?
Physically, yes. Moved from Atlanta to DC maybe 8 months in.
And what did you work on?
I worked on a couple of projects. I worked with some of the defense primes, for example, Lockheed and others on technology strategy, which gave me a very interesting view in terms of some of these primes that make a lot of money from the government, what their executive teams are like, how they think.
That's usually, interesting view is usually an euphemism for something much more interesting than that interesting. Anything you want to share?
I was not particularly impressed, I guess.
And why was that?
What was
your take on large companies?
Yeah, as like a 22-year-old at the time, it was me and like a few other analysts that were literally writing the technology strategy for some of these business units that were multi-billion-dollar business units in these defense companies. And we were not domain experts, right? So like the fact that we were doing that kind of work and that was kind of how strategy was being developed was honestly kind of terrifying. But yeah, so I think I worked with some of the primes, and then I moved over to work with some of the government on the intelligence community side, and that's when I really fell in love with the national security mission.
And was this when we were chasing non-nation states, or?
This was pre-nation state days. This was back in the counterterrorism days.
And what did the mission feel like?
I was instantly hooked, to be honest. So the agency I was working with, very sensitive about, like kind of how like what you can talk about. But the people that I met while working with that agency were some of the smartest and most like mission-driven people that I've ever met, and had done some of the most like. Had put themselves in physical danger, or kind of were operating in a space that was, I don't know. The fact that people were willing to make that sacrifice to me and were really smart, and they were really driven, and they were like people just like all of us, but just decided to go a different path. That to me was extremely motivating.
And did it feel different than having worked with the primes?
Yeah, 100%, I think. Yeah, I think with government, you have a lot of people in DoD and the IC, and there's a lot of noise and bureaucracy and things that don't work particularly well, but there are pockets of people that are doing really amazing work, and it's when you find those pockets, that's when it's really exciting to work with those types of groups.
Sounds like you're still excited about the work you did.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
How long did you stay working with them?
I was at McKinsey for about 3 years.
That's about the typical McKinsey tour for all of you.
It was like a year longer.
A year longer.
I spent probably 2 years of that working on defense and intelligence related things, and then I hopped to In-Q-Tel from McKinsey.
And were you recruited, or did you find them?
It was this guy, Dan Guak, emailed the McKinsey DC office and with like the job description, and I read the job description and I was like, yes, I would like to do this.
What was the job description?
go invest in technology startups for CIA. That was, it's like, yeah, I want to do that. It sounds great.
Really?
Yeah.
And what was that job like?
That job was really fun. I think, I liked it because I had a lot of freedom.
Remind people, they all saw Bauscher, I think, but remind people the mission of In-Q-Tel one more time.
Yeah, the mission of In-Q-Tel is just to basically provide CIA access to technology literally out in Silicon Valley. It was founded with offices in Menlo Park. And traditionally, the people that develop technology for the IC specifically are all out in like Reston, Virginia, really niche small engineering shops that are building products for people. And the whole purpose of In-Q-Tel was trying to take the things that were going on in Silicon Valley in the 90s and early 2000s and push them in. And it's evolved over time, but that was the initial mission.
And your role was a specific piece of this?
Yeah, so I worked on computer vision and NLP back in like 2016.
Wow.
And I worked specifically with the Counterterrorism Mission Center at CIA. That's where I spent most of my time. And my goal was to spend as much time in the building with those people as possible. That was where I got the most energy in that job.
Yeah, a lot of this will be relevant for how you scaled Vannevar Labs, but I think it's a great point you just make. We'll come back to it in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And so just tripling down on that, so you got close to the problem.
Yeah.
Well, that's a big idea. Maybe, do you mind if we embellish it now?
Yes.
Yeah.
What did that give you versus sitting outside the wire?
Yeah, at the time, the major problem for CIA was the Islamic State. This was back in 2016. And you can't, because literally people at CIA will not tell you, you can't actually figure out what the mission is without going into their physical spaces and physically watching them do their job. The thing that really was an unlock for me was partnering with, I found somebody on the government side who's amazing. I still keep in touch with her, that was like a senior analyst in that group, and she had relationships with everybody. So I just kind of latched onto her, and then we just kind of walked around and went to all these different mission groups and kind of looked at what they were doing. And that, by far, I mean, that you really don't know what to invest in unless you know kind of like what the actual underlying mission problems are at that level of detail.
So getting as close as possible to the customer was a key learning.
Yeah. And specifically for me, it was we would go on site with the customer and we would meet with them in conference rooms, and that does not cut it. You have to physically go behind their desk and watch them do the thing that they're tasked to do.
So literally understand the day in the life of a customer.
Yeah.
Right, by watching them.
Yeah.
And being able to go up the whiteboard and draw what do you think you saw.
Yeah.
Now, didn't they have the quick that was supposedly good?
Yeah, there are parts of the government that are maybe a little bit more bureaucratic, and I think that's actually one of the key lessons that I learned from In-Q-Tel is there, and this is not to pick on the Quick, but there are these.
Why don't you explain what the Quick is?
The Quick is an innovation group within CIA whose job it is to interface between the mission end users and the company.
To do what you were doing personally.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And when you separate the product people and engineers that are building the stuff from the mission end users, and you have a go-between sitting in the middle, you 100% of the time have much worse results. So that was one of the things that I learned. Yeah.
And I think, as Paul said, we're going to talk about that when we talk about Vannevar Labs.
Yeah.
And so, was it fun?
I had a lot of fun. Yeah. Steve Bauscher actually gave me a tremendous amount of leeway to just try things.
How many of you were there?
On the investment, you mean overall on the investment? I think there was maybe 10 people in Menlo Park on the investment team, something like that.
And so what made you leave if it was so great?
I saw one particular mission problem that was related to this Islamic State mission, and I could not figure out how to solve it at the In-Q-Tel side. I could not figure out how to do it. I tried to find companies and kind of like push them into the building, and that wasn't working.
Because? The tech wasn't ready, or they couldn't modify it for the problem, or they weren't cleared enough? Or?
The premise of In-Q-Tel, which has some validity, I'm about to knock it for a second though. The premise of In-Q-Tel of like dual use technology always is the answer is not right. You can build if you try to take something commercial off the shelf and just jam it onto a particular mission problem, the people that are building that commercial product usually don't have the domain expertise to actually build it exactly to the mission.
Do you just explain like dual use, so you like level set that, because it's a big philosophical difference.
Yeah. Dual use is this theory that existed pre-Paul Kwan and like some of the defense investors, that you can only invest in defense companies if they have both a commercial and defense business. You can't invest in pure defense companies. Anduril kind of disproved this. We are one of the other companies in the space that like fundamentally disagrees with this theory. But at the time, that was the prevailing wisdom, is you have to be dual use in order to be successful. And that I saw firsthand at In-Q-Tel that was actually not the case. The most important mission problems were not dual use by nature, yet the government was also spending hundreds of millions of dollars on these systems built by like Raytheon, which does not have the best software engineers, that weren't working. So it wasn't like a mission problem was there, the money was there, but you needed to, my take was if you could bring together the right product people and engineers and the right people with domain expertise, you could really build things that were like fundamentally different in the defense space.
So we went to school.
Yeah, so exactly.
But let me just challenge that for the sake of the conversation to you and Paul as well. So knowing what you know now, would there have been a way to get people in a dual use company deep enough in front of the customer to actually make it useful?
So the best dual use companies that I see operating right now, probably like I would say Scale AI is maybe one of the better ones. And the trick with that, so Scale AI does a lot of NLPs, trains all the LLMs for OpenAI. They have a massive government business. The problem with companies like Scale, and when it comes to defense, is usually their engineering teams have to split their prioritization, and when that prioritization split happens, usually naturally they're 90% focused on commercial, 10% focused on defense. And what that means is you basically R&D or an engineering starve the defense product, and your salespeople then end up having to jam a commercial product down into DoD, which can work if you have a really great sales team.
So it's the financial math that doesn't work.
I think it's
allocating.
Well, and like we talked about with Teresa Carlson, right, at AWS, how many of the engineers are going to pass top secret clearances and get into the building of the best engineers at Amazon? You lose attrition, right? And so how do you get the very best people working on the hardest problems?
All right, well, good. And so you were doing this, you realized that there might be a better way to solve the problem. And what made you go get your MBA?
Yeah, it took me like a year from seeing that initial break in that Islamic State kind of technology problem set to having the realization that you might be able to raise money and build a company in this space. That process was super slow. It took me like a year of because I kept thinking about like, why is this not working? Why can't I affect it here? Why, is there another company I can join? I didn't see another company that I can join. So it took like a year of noodling on it.
Pretty fast.
Well, I don't know. It felt like a long time.
It feels like a long time. That's pretty fast.
Yeah, and then I was thinking about, okay, how do I start this? I didn't know if we were going to be able to raise money because at the time, like nobody cared. Like defense was not an interesting topic.
Until Paul came
along. And so for me, I use business school as a hedge, basically. It's like, all right, I want to go in, I want to start this thing. I don't know how long it's going to take to raise. I don't know if it's going to be 3 months or like 3 years or never.
You always had baby lotion to fall back.
I always had I could always go back into consulting. Yeah.
So you went to business school with the idea that you wanted to start a company, but we're going to get some more skills, or?
It was purely just to buy time.
I
spent not a lot of time in my classes, unfortunately, which.
And did you actually start the company in business school?
Yeah, Nini and I incorporated it in, I think it was like January of our first year. So it was like 4 months.
And who is Nini?
Nini's my co-founder.
And was she also in business school?
Yes. Yeah.
And did you have in mind the product you wanted to solve? And
I did, which in retrospect was honestly a mistake.
How so? I thought you understood the problem.
I thought I understood. Yeah, I think we knew what we wanted to build, and Nini was an end user that experienced that same problem. Her background was in the intelligence community as an analyst, like deployed in Afghanistan and other places, and she experienced the same problem that I experienced. And so the idea was, we're going to build this thing, and then we're going to sell it into the groups that we used to work with. It's going to be great. The problem was that the delta between when I saw the problem in the building And when we actually got money and then engineers and then started to build stuff, that delta was like a year and a half, 2 years.
Yes.
And at that point, your information is totally stale.
Really?
There's this pivot in 2019, 2020 went away from counterterrorism towards Russia and China, as it should have. But that meant the thing we built, nobody wanted to buy. Kept doing all these demos, nobody wanted to buy our stuff.
I see. So the problem had changed. It wasn't that the methodology was wrong. It's that you were no longer in front of, you didn't have your tickets or access or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
And so what did you do?
We did a ton of demos. we tried to build a lot of different features. Again, this is when we're not super sophisticated in product development. Tried to build a lot of features, doing a lot of demos. We couldn't figure out if it was the product or if it was us not knowing how to sell. And eventually we started hearing people, nobody would call us back, but if we would hear from time to time people saying, Russia or China, like, hey, this is great, you're doing this for Arabic and other languages in the Middle East. Can you do anything for Mandarin or Russian? And after I ignored that, again, like a great product person that I am, I ignored that for like 3 or 4 months. And eventually we had literally nothing to lose at this point. We had a meeting in DC like the following week, and one of the engineers in the team and I decided, like, all right, we're gonna build a V0 thing for one of those languages. We built that, and then we started demoing that, and that's the first time we had actual whole.
Yeah, so the core engine concept, for Arabic versus Mandarin was not dissimilar.
Yeah, that's right.
Language.
Yeah.
So big idea for all of you. This was a pivot, a substantive pivot.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And back to Paul's point that the core architecture didn't get thrown out.
Yes, that's
but the business model changed.
Yeah.
Right. And the target customers and the users inside the building changed.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
You're no longer talking to the folks who are working on ISIS or Al Qaeda problems. You're talking about people working on China and Russia.
Yep.
Right. Different sides of buildings, et cetera.
Yep.
And therefore you needed to make new friends and learn new parts of the organization.
Yes. Yeah.
And how long did that take?
It probably took us way too long. I mean,
A year, months?
Yeah, probably 9 months,
Yeah.
I would say, and that's like I'm giving us a little bit more credit. It's probably like 9 months generously.
Right.
I think our first actual deployment, our first real traction with our first deployment was probably 18 months into the life of the company, and we probably made the pivot to China and Russia maybe 9 to 12 months in. So that's a long time. Dude.
And just for, again, there's something you just pointed out. A pivot doesn't come with a memo, right? You didn't get a memo that says, hey, you're wrong. We're telling you you're wrong. Your VCs didn't, or your early investors didn't know what you knew. They just were happy to be investing in you because you were smart and you had these relationships. But it took you guys to collect enough data for the light bulb to go on that says, that buzzing sound we're hearing is probably not noise, it's probably a signal. Is that a fair way to describe it?
100%, yeah.
And I think that for all of you who are going to do startup careers, you should know this, is that your odds of nailing it, and Paul push back, 100% in your first iteration of the product is close to zero. It's being able to listen to the market, and sometimes you just can't get your head out of the way because you put so much effort into product one, which you thought were perfect because you thought you understood the customer.
100%.
Right?
Yeah.
Is that true?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Right. So, Paul, before I hand it off to you in funding, so were you funded at this time with money from Paul? Or?
Yeah. It was Catherine Boyle at General Catalyst. That was the first. Yeah, that was like the origins of the company. Was we raised.
And did you get funded when you were Stanford students, or did you drop out?
When we were students, and then subsequently dropped out as per probably conditions of the term sheet.
All right. Well, Paul, should I hand it over to
Yeah. Let me just give people a sense for where you are today so they can understand where the story is, and let's go back and fill in the pieces, right? So we'll come back to the funding and kind of some of the struggles, but give people a sense for what's happened in the last 2 years, because the trajectory of Vannevar Labs from a financial and adoption standpoint is really unparalleled in our estimation vis-a-vis other companies in defense tech, and so we want to unpack that. But just kind of to lay out what's happened in the last 2 years, it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it's been
remarkable.
It's been wild. Yeah, we went from about 3 million in revenue to about 50 million in 24 months, and we went from like 20 people to maybe around 100 people, one product to 4 or 5 products. We've been profitable for about a year. That was like a huge deal for us.
The Series B kind of
raised some money. Yeah,
some money.
Raised 75 million in Series B.
You all should be so lucky.
And so I think, you wrote this blog post, kind of how to invent defense products a year or two ago. It's like really highly worth reading and tracking down. I think a lot of those things still stand and are worth unpacking. I think we're all waiting for part two, which is about how to scale a defensive company, which you're doing in real time. But I think just going back towards some of those rules, I think are worth unpacking vis-a-vis mission, user understanding. Maybe start to unpack that, because that's the critical piece that got you from 0 to 3 to, in my estimation, to 50.
Yeah. I think, I don't know how many of y'all are interested in like the product development side of things from a startup standpoint, but the key things that we learned in defense are, for defense in particular, you can't, and I think it's probably true for other business too, but for defense in particular, you cannot build a thing and sell it unless it's solving a top 3 mission problem in the DoD. It needs to be, like, no joke, one of the most urgent problems in the entire Department of Defense in order to get enough excitement for the procurement engine to move. And so when we think about making product bets, that is one of the key, that's like one of the main things that we look for, is like, is this a top 3 problem or is it a top 10 problem? If it's a top 10 problem, you're not gonna be able to sell anything. That sounds really obvious, but it's not at all obvious when you're in there. Like, as you're building the product, you're constantly trying to sell it, and as you're trying to sell it, you're getting information on, like, is this the right thing or not? Am I getting pull or not?
So I think you use the word irrationally excited. Can people get irrationally excited? Like, what does that actually feel like, look like when you're doing the work?
Yeah, I mean, it's like pitching a colonel, and that colonel in the meeting stopping you and like thanking you for what you're doing. Like, this is like we're not able to do this. You're providing a national security like capability that we don't have access to. Or it's like, and this has happened. Sounds kind of crazy. But we've gotten like, our team has gotten standing ovations from user groups a couple times, not very often, but like that's unusual for DoD. It's not normal for, like, imagine you using like a software product and you have some people that built the product come into your space. Like, to feel that way about something that people use is like really hard to generate. But in DoD, you have to generate that level of enthusiasm because the procurement process is so hard for all of the buyers. Like, it's just, you need people to really want to burn down bridges for you. So that's what we mean. That's the main thing for product development in DoD, I would say. Yeah. And
then you talk a lot about, like, you know, as Steve mentioned, like understanding what the users need, what they do.
Yeah.
How did you, I mean, you obviously had some access, Nini as well. How do you get that access? How do you get behind someone's desk to see what they're actually doing in these use cases?
Yeah, it's really tough in the beginning when you don't have clearances and you don't have existing relationships to get you on military bases. If you're in that scenario, then you really need to like rely on friends that are in. You actually have a couple of like GSB folks that are in the Veterans Club in the back here. Like, those are the kinds of people that you want to tap, and then kind of use them to kind of get to their network and understand what the mission problems are from the outside. That will get you a decent amount of the way, but your iteration cycles are going to be a lot slower. Like, it might take you 12 months to iterate to something that it would otherwise take you 2 months if you had a clearance. When you have a clearance, it becomes a lot easier, because then you're able to just go, like, you partner. You need to have, when you're doing product development, you need to have a product person partnered with like a BD person, basically a salesperson, that is constantly mapping out the organizations that you're trying to get into and then getting you access to them. That partnership is like really, really key. If you don't have that, you're in for a tough time. But if you have that partnership and you're cleared, then it's very easy to get on base with people. And whenever we go on base with people, we never pitch them a product. This is like this is like a sales tactic, but you never pitch people the product, like demo it, talk about the buttons, like that's like the worst thing you could possibly do. Instead, we do a lot of prep time on the mission of the group that we're pitching to. Like in some cases, like a couple weeks of prep time, really understanding what the mission is, and then just showing our stuff on that mission. So when you're going on these bases, you're walking in with like immediate value to them. And then it's easy to ask, like, hey, this looks interesting to you. Can you walk me down to like your end users or other people, these people down the hall.
Can you also, like, I think we skipped over like what the first product does in whatever disclosure we can say.
Yeah. The gist of it, like the thesis that we had was a couple things. One is government's really terrible at parsing like foreign language data. That was like the very basic theory of the first product. In 2016, 2017, 2018, and now obviously today, there's a lot of tools that you can use to make foreign language data like a lot more easy to process. For example, machine translation used to not be very good. Now it's actually pretty amazing. We then at the same time, there was this massive pivot from counterterrorism to Asia and Europe, and the government collection mechanisms that existed for counterterrorism don't work super well for like Russia and China. You can't necessarily fly like a air asset overhead some of these places in like a safe way to collect information. So you needed different forms of intelligence in order to enable those missions. And the way that manifested is we'd go on these military bases, we'd go look at the intel analysts, and we'd go look at what they were doing, and it'd be like people like Google searching stuff. Like
Google Translate searching.
Yeah, like Russia and, plane in like that kind of thing. So that tells you that there's something broken in that process. And so the first product that we built was around collecting data that we thought would allow people to answer more useful, complicated, like more urgent mission questions. And then the like tech stuff we had to build to do that was around kind of secure data collection and then processing of like image, video, text data. Yeah.
So we go back. So that's kind of where we've gone from. What else have we learned? Go back to kind of initial fundraising, super fast, super glamorous. Just money's coming in the door.
No, absolutely not. I wish that's how it went.
60 meetings, 55, 100. How many meetings?
Yeah, for our seed round, it took me 6 months, and that's not like a light 6 months. Like I'm kind of doing this part time. That's like I am doing this full every day, all day. I'm waking up at 5 in the morning with like panic attack. Like what do I need to change in the pitch?
Isn't that Zoom world where like you can do 10 pitches in one day?
No, you got to drive
This
around.
is like drive around.
Yeah.
Up and down 101, 280.
Exactly. These are the olden days. But yeah, it took us probably 40 pitches, and like a lot more diligence meetings on top of that, but 40 pitches to like distinct VCs to get one offer. And that was Catherine Boyle at NGC. Yeah.
So can I ask just, how did your pitch change from day one to the one where you got the check? What did you learn?
Yes, great question. Yeah, so like the thing that I didn't appreciate is you have to think about your pitch as a product, and you're iterating on it until you find fit with like an investor. And I would say a lot of things I learned, we were iterating every week. Like we would do a pitch, we'd hear where people were getting stuck, and then we would figure out what we could change to kind of address those points. The biggest thing that I learned from the seed round was we were trying to dance around the hard issues in the business. Turns like DoD is like actually a very difficult customer. You can't like do a seed pitch to start a defense company and not address things like how are you going to win programs, which take a long time, require a lot of like bureaucratic maneuvering. And so I initially would try to skirt around those issues. Like, no, you don't need to worry about that. We're going to figure it out. It's going to be great. And ultimately what ended up resonating with people is I just made a slide. It was like, here are all the things that you have to believe about us in order for this to be a good investment. And it was like, you got to believe we can win deals in DoD. You got to believe we can recruit a really strong engineering team. And I think the last one is you got to believe like the exit math. You have to believe that defense company multiples will be useful.
So you did what I call virus inoculation. You put all the objections on a single slide.
Yeah.
So before they could raise them, you raised them for them.
Yeah.
Is that what you did?
Yes. Yeah.
But it took getting thrown out for every one of them. Yeah,
Did you ever, like mentally, like how was that process?
Super difficult. Yeah, I mean, really, really, really stressful. I remember there was one pitch meeting with a firm that will not be named where we did a partner meeting on Friday. They were like, this is great. You're going to come in, like, we're going to talk to like, the rest of the team on Monday. We're going to get you a term sheet, whatever. And then I was doing a recruiting call because I was looking for like engineers at the time. I was doing a recruiting call Saturday morning, and I may have gone out the night before. I don't really remember. And I was doing the recruiting call, trying to get this engineer to join. The engineer was telling me that what we were doing was like a terrible idea. And then at the same time, I got an email from that investor saying like, hey man, I know I was really excited, but like, it's not a good fit for us. Don't bother coming in on Monday. And
you didn't get the pitch on Monday?
No, I didn't even get the pitch. And then I also got an email from Stanford saying, hey, you haven't been attending your classes. You're like, we're going to kick you out of school unless you like get your attendance up. Because GSB is an attendance-based system. And so I was like, okay, this is great. I really hope we get a term sheet in like a month. Yeah. So I think that like you have, and there are like days that are harder than that, but it's extremely stressful, and that like manifests physically too. Like I remember after we finally got the term sheet and closed the round, I crashed for like a week and a half. Like I had like a fever. I was in the dorm room. I was just like laid out cold, just like in recovery mode. So in that in the early days, like
Yeah.
stuff like that kind of happens from time to time. It's like not a super glamorous.
Yeah.
You
So
know,
let's
it really is very
create
difficult.
some ray of optimism. Then the Series A and then the B.
Yeah.
The B was definitely a lot more fun, but let's kind of just step
Sure.
function through that. and what
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was like.
Just the fundraising
Yeah.
part of it. Yeah, Series A, everybody still thought we were going to fail, for sure. Everybody still thought what we were doing was a terrible idea. I think we had maybe 2-3 million in revenue, but defense was not a thing that people thought was a good idea. And so I pitched probably 50 people that time, and we got I got Greg Sands, who co-led our seed round, ended up putting in a term sheet as an inside investor to lead the Series A, and then we brought in Dan Kwok from Point72. But that was also extremely difficult. We had some leadership team issues during the fundraise. You know, like we weren't sure if we were going to close. Like it was like all the stuff that like typically goes wrong, all happened to go wrong during the fundraise. But yeah, so we 50 pitches, 40 pitches. We got a term sheet, and then the Series B, I think it was. You know, our odds are a little bit better. We had 30 pitches. We got a few term sheets coming out of that, but it's still very difficult. You're still getting rejected the majority of the time. It's not like you're walking in, term sheets are falling from the sky. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of, brings up the idea that to an entrepreneur, no is just the beginning of a conversation, right?
Yeah. Well, for me, it always hurt. Some of the no's definitely hurt, especially when they were like people that I had personal relationships with. But yes, you have to kind of be willing to persist through that.
Can we just talk about, you talk about like the importance of the mission.
Yeah.
And kind of the purpose is something, we're really focused on. We actually think purpose is one of the most important things in terms of company value creation. You have technology, you have product, you have go-to-market, you have culture, but we think purpose is increasingly what separates companies. And so talk about that and how it affects the recruiting of people.
Oh, yeah.
Especially as you go from 50 to 100 and more.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, the whole point of Vannevar was I didn't want to work on baby lotion. Like that's kind of what it came down to. Is like we spend a lot of time at work, and you want that work to be meaningful. Like you want to actually feel fulfilled and excited by what you're doing. And so that was like fundamentally why defense for me. And I think it's really cool to bring in, like most of our team hasn't worked in defense before. All the engineers pretty much. And so being able to bring people in and then expose them to that world and see them get hooked is like really, really phenomenal. But how it shows up in terms of recruiting is if somebody wants to work for Vannevar, or like in defense in particular, unless they have like a Anduril offer, which now Anduril's like big enough that we don't see that as much. If they want to do early stage defense, our odds of getting them are like almost 100%. Not quite 100%, but almost 100%. And we get a lot of inbound, like people self-selecting into like coming to us because they want to work on this stuff. And then the other part is like our attrition rate is super low. We had the first, I guess he was the second engineer that ever joined the team, was there for about 4 years, and he left, and he's the first attrition that we've had that was like
it's crazy.
non-regrettable attrition, and that's super cool. Like the fact that you can have people stick around for that long is cool, and I think a big part of that is like it's the mission, So I think that's been an advantage for us, I think, for sure.
So I'm just curious. So, do you do direct sales to the government, or do
Yes.
you work through primes?
Direct sales.
So,
yeah.
So you had a little experience at In-Q-Tel, but how did you build a sales force? Isn't government sales a little different than
Very hard.
selling baby lotion or B2B?
100%. Yeah.
So why don't you let the class know a little bit about what you had to learn and build and compete with? Or are you competing with the Raytheons and the Deloittes?
And you made a lot of mistakes along the way.
What's that?
You made mistakes.
Oh, yeah,
along
You
the
could
way.
say that. I wasn't. But
Yeah,
I think helping the class maybe learn from some of those mistakes. About what was different, what was unique.
Yeah. I think honestly, we made about 2.5 years worth of mistakes, which is quite a long time when you're in it. I think some of the things that we learned that were totally not obvious to me is like the biggest deals that we've ever done haven't just been a salesperson. We've always had a trio. We've always had a salesperson, an engineer, like a customer-facing engineer, and a product person in the deal. And we didn't used to do that. And the second we started combining product and engineering and a salesperson and allocating those to the most important deals, our deal sizes went up by like 5x, and our time to close went down a lot as well.
This is literally making sure 3 people go to the meeting.
Yes,
Yeah,
like
this is
the
literally-
product person comes with a really compelling mission demo. That's their only job. Like you're going to spend 2 weeks obsessing over whatever the most like the highest impact thing we can show them is. The engineer is there to just lend technical credibility and talk about like exciting, cool things that we're doing. And then the salesperson is doing an insane amount of pre-work in terms of who the group is, who the people are, like to the level of what each of their individual incentives are, like what are like the minefields that we don't want to step in. Sometimes bringing on advisors well before the meeting to kind of understand, to kind of like build that base of information. But yeah, if you set up deal teams with that trio, your odds of success go way up. So that would be like first thing that I would say for people that are trying to sell into defense is like do it with a team. Do not do it with like a single salesperson. Nini kind of like built out the whole sales organization in our sales strategy, but I think the other thing that we really didn't understand the importance of until about 2-3 years in is the importance of program offices and program managers, which are these groups in the government that have a lot of money that are often extremely disconnected from the mission and the end user.
Yeah, you would really explain why they are important, what they control?
Don't they write the requirements?
Yeah, they write the requirements.
Why don't you explain what that is?
So requirements, basically this is going to sound insane when I describe it, but there's like a 3-year budgeting process called the NDAA,
There you go.
where the government today is setting their budget for 2027 for what tools, technology they're going to buy. Now, if you think about that from like a software product standpoint, that makes no sense because the problems that you're going to have in 2027 are not the same problems that you're going to have in 2024. So automatically you have like a huge challenge there from a sales standpoint. So when we are selling stuff this year, we're not just selling for 2024, but we're trying to get baked into the budget for 2027, 3 years down the line. That's extremely difficult to do when you have like a 6-month existing customer relationship and you're going 6 months and you're like, hey, I know we're doing good stuff now. Let's talk about 3 years down the line. Like how much do you want to budget? It's like a really hard conversation to have. That budget is deployed by these groups called program offices, which not all of it, but a lot of it is deployed with these groups called program offices that are separate from the end user mission groups. So you'll have some program office that's tasked with deploying like a particular type of software in a particular group or like particular type of hardware. But they are not, this is very key, they're like not the same people that are using the software or using the hardware. So you have to, when you're doing a deal, you have to kind of marry those 2 groups up in order to get anything done. And so you're basically, you're playing like a multi-dimensional game of chess.
So that's long-term revenue. How did you
Yeah.
get short-term revenue?
So this is again, like, I don't know if this is gonna be useful for anybody, but for defense.
Getting short-term revenue is always
It's always
Keeps
useful.
you in business.
The most important thing for defense companies for short-term revenue is this process called the UFR process, unfunded requirements process.
Thank you.
Yeah, so basically, if you think in any given year, maybe 80% of the budget is going to be spent on these programs. 20% of it is up for grabs. Basically, you can work with your program manager to run this UFR process to kind of get allocated some of that 20%. There's other things you can do within your money, including like reprogramming, taking money away from existing programs. That's super dangerous because now you've made an enemy somewhere with a defense prime, but. Your main route is these UFRs.
And so the reason I ask you all this is getting in front of the customer, understanding their problem, building a product that matches their problem, et cetera. All's for naught unless you understand how to sell into the government.
100%.
And that there are both short-term and long-term strategies that, in hindsight, if you knew that, you probably could have saved a year, right?
Yeah, definitely. I'd say yeah.
But required a lot of hard-earned and hard-won knowledge.
Yep.
That makes you incredibly independent of primes, or meaning larger companies. You now have built that domain expertise, which is probably a pretty big moat for other startups trying to enter the space. Is that a
totally agree? Yeah.
Is that a fair?
Yeah, and you were on, 5 or 6 million of capital raised. You got to 25 million.
Yeah.
Ish.
Yeah. 12
Right.
million. 20 million capital raised.
So
Yeah,
to 25, which is
Yeah.
unlike Anduril raising $1 billion to get to that level. I think that's the capital efficiency is
Amazing.
quite unique.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we started Hacking for Defense, Steve, Pete Newell, and I, we thought we would love to find people like Brett, like Vannevar, and help them get started. We obviously aren't going to take credit for anything, but it just warms our heart to see a company like yours succeed, because it's important. You mentioned when you think of Vannevar, you think they're in the same line as Anduril and SpaceX and all the companies that challenge the David and Goliath that beat the primes and are adding value in ways that the system is configured to prevent. I mean, we were able to win the Cold War with the old system, when we could build incrementally better large-end systems every 10 or 15 years, and you knew what threats were down the road, but whole different world now. And the kind of emerging technology we need to compete and prevail in this century's competition and really determine what the world order is going to look like is going to be coming from people like Brett and his team, those kinds of technologies. And it's not easy, and you shared your story of how you prevailed over everything being aligned to make you fail. And it's an extraordinary testament for you and your team's leadership and what you've done. And we need it, because if people like you don't succeed, we're all going to fail. But you're really the vanguard, I think, you and a small handful of others. So hopefully inspire some of you other people out here. In this take our class, you can be Vannevar, really, because we want to get behind you. But all of you, if you're inspired to do what they've done, boy, we need it, because the stakes are high. And we can't just leave it a handful. We need a whole bunch of Vannevar Labs. But you're a great example, a great inspiration for all of us. And thanks for joining us.